Welcome to Part-Time Devils and Salaryman Heroes, Work Life in Anime and Manga. I'm Left Below, and now let's get to work. Conventional wisdom says write what you know, which is why so many Stephen King protagonists are writers or John Arbuckle from Garfield is a cartoonist. In anime and manga, you get this occasionally, like with the series Bakuman by the creators of Death Note, or the delightful Keep Your Hands Off the Ken, which you should watch. You also get so many school anime. I'm here to talk about the rest. Depictions of workplaces in anime and manga set roughly in modern Japan. But first, a quick history lesson via an anime that needs no introduction except to say that it has nothing to do with the workplace, Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer takes place in the 1920s, which were part of the transitional period that birthed modern Japan, starting with the Meiji Restoration in 1868 and ending with the defeat in World War II in 1945. The depiction of Tanjiro's family of traditional charcoal makers in the mountains, isolated from the benefits of urban and modernizing 1920s Japan, is fairly accurate. In 1941, as the Pacific War began, 79% of Japanese people were living in rural areas, and modernization was slow to come to rural Japan before reforms brought in by the Allied occupation government broke up the big post-samurai landholders and gave farmers direct control of their output. Urban Japan, in contrast, modernized fairly rapidly in the last decades of the 19th century, again depicted in series like Demon Slayer. It wasn't just a creative choice to portray Tanjiro and other slayers as medieval meets modern. That was the common experience for many who were called up for the war and brought out of an 18th century world, then flung violently into the 20th. This transitional period brought a number of familiar faces into the Japanese business scene, especially financial and heavy industry companies like Mitsubishi and Nissan, or a little playing card company that some of you may have heard of called Nintendo. It also began to shape some of the things that are seen as more unique about Japanese work culture. A lot of anime fans will know that Japanese social systems place a lot of emphasis on rank, senpai being the honorific that comes up most often during school-based anime, but you see it applied in workplace anime as well. Indeed, in normal workplace conversations, you often see references to rank in addressing one's colleagues, terms like kacho or bucho denoting different types of managers. In fact, one of these rank references passed out of Japanese as a loan word so thoroughly that I didn't peg it as a Japanese word until a few years ago. Honsho, as a generic term for a chief or boss. That weaving of rank into conversation is going to seem weird to most English speakers, unless you're a military veteran. When you think of the Japanese workplace in military terms, though, a lot of this starts to make sense, because in Meiji Japan, the civil service had its ranks aligned with the military. The first of these charts shows that you had equivalencies for ranks from general to private. The few ranks above the bottom here are equivalent to the NCOs in the army, and then you see the long climb up the ranks. This will also seem familiar to folks in the audience who have been in the federal civil service with its pretty strict GS ranking system. This military bureaucratic ranking system was carried over to private industry, which this chart from Mitsubishi can illustrate. A lot of details here, but the key takeaway is that this hierarchy determined how you got paid. As a middle manager, it didn't matter what you did for the company, it mattered what rank you are. And that created the mindset you see in anime and manga, where you talk to your regional manager in charge of sales like they're a lieutenant colonel. With the history lesson out of the way, here's how this panel is going to unfold. It was rough pitching this because work is as broad a topic as possible, but I settled on these three categories for focus because they're what popped into mind when I thought anime in the workplace: salaryman, arubaito, and small businesses. So I skip over some biggies like factory work, farmers, teachers, healthcare, and sort of bureaucrats, and salaryman will be more private sector focused. Work is for everyone and all jobs are worthy of respect, but you gotta pick something. With that, let's dive in with the embodied stereotype of contemporary Japan, the salaryman. First off is headhunted to another world, from salaryman to Big Four. This series follows Denosuke Uchimura, who gets plucked to another world based on his job title, Overseas Manager. This opening scene is a joke suggesting he was summoned by accident, but it's quickly overwritten when the Demon Lord reveals that he summoned Denosuke after recognizing his middle manager talent. The show does a good job highlighting several things that stand out about the Salaryman when compared to his American counterpart. Just minutes after this scene, the Demon Lord grants his new servant his formal rank in the Demon Army and tells him that what the rank is equivalent to back in Japan, much like that chart I showed you earlier. The other elites in the army immediately have their doubts, though, and the Demon Lord agrees to a test whereby Denosuke must negotiate with an irate Minotaur chieftain. At first he seems intimidated by the giant cheesed-off man-bull, but he quickly sets to work with one of the keys to the Salaryman toolkit, etiquette. Etiquette is taken very seriously in white-collar business settings, the realm of the Salaryman. The exchange of business cards is undertaken with a reverence that would make Patrick Bateman blush. Business cards are to be given and received with two hands, presented flat and horizontal. Cards are to be given to the recipient in order of seniority, and should not be immediately put away, but instead placed on a tabletop if you're meeting somewhere like a boardroom. In a meeting room setting, guests are typically seated the furthest away from the door. Being summoned from that world, Denosuke quickly figures out what the Minotaur chieftain was expecting but not getting from the Demon Lord's army and gives it to him, acing the test and cementing an alliance for his lord. Getting back to the concept of rank before assignment, you see Denosuke handle a wide variety of tasks in a way that would seem almost like a parody to Americans. Like you made a cartoon businessman and someone asks, well, what business does he do? And you simply reply, business. His skill in negotiation and alliance making, salesmanship for a low fantasy world, definitely come up a lot. But you also see him work on market research, product design, and order fulfillment. This fits with the idea that what he does matters less than where he fits in the organization in a manner that, again, seems backwards to us. To cite a real-world Japanese example, former Nintendo president Satoru Iwata, RIP, started as a programmer with HAL Labs, a subsidiary, but didn't leave that part of his work behind as he climbed the corporate ladder. When he was 3 years away from his promotion to president, he helped Game Freak with compression algorithms for Pokemon Gold and Silver, and also single-handedly ported the battle logic from Pokemon Red and Blue to Pokemon Stadium. This jack-of-all-tradesmanship clashes with the American setup where it's all about what you do for the company. You're a salesman first, a Salesforce employee second. In Japan, it's the other way around. It's about what you do for the company, and so any way that you can contribute is seen as valid. Headhunted to Another World is a fairly inspiring look at Japanese work culture, all things considered. Denosuke's business acumen is an asset to the Demon Lord without any kind of irony. He's a demonstration of what a proud salaryman can accomplish, but there are still clouds on the horizon. We do see brief glimpses of his past, that he became overseas manager because nobody else at his rank wanted the job, and he was seen as weak enough to be forced into it. You can also see him be unfairly maligned for failures that weren't directly his fault. So it's still a wish fulfillment isekai, but not one where a loser finds his talent, but a world where a man with genuine talent finally sees those talents recognized compared to the world he came from. Second in the docket for Salaryman, let's look at a salary woman instead. The red panda from the folks who gave us Hello Kitty, Agretsuko. Now there's something worth noting in the very first minute of the series. In this screenshot, you see a corporate executive inducting a large class of new employees. Like the ranking system for employees, this bulk recruitment of recent university graduates started in the Meiji-era bureaucracy, where the government would hire graduates from high-ranking imperial universities without subjecting them to the civil service exams they tried in the first few years after the Restoration. This gradually evolved to the kind of bulk recruitment of college grads that you can see in that opening moment of Agretsuko. Second thing to notice about Agretsuko still comes in the opening minutes of the entire series, and that's the office that they work in. Long cafeteria-style desks for the employees, with the managers getting desks of their own, and the ranking manager for the department having a desk where they can witness all the action. This, too, stems from the Meiji-era bureaucracy, which was assembled so hastily after the Restoration that they didn't have time to come up with the duties for individual employees. A scholar of Japanese public administration said, quote, "The unit comprised by those in the large office represents a kind of independent kingdom, in which the section manager, Kacho, is like the lord of the realm." Just like with graduate recruitment, this is something that trickled down from Japanese government in the 1880s to the purgatory Retsuko found herself in 130 years later. This is another one that came down from Japan to the US when American managerial scientists looked to what made Japanese business work well in the 1970s when their auto industry started to eat Detroit alive, so yeah, you've got old Meiji to blame for your lack of privacy at work. But Agretsuko is about more personal issues than annoying office layouts or hiring practices. The hook of the show is the clash of internal and external. For those who've not seen it, Retsuko's main hobby is that she likes to go to karaoke after work, alone, and sing death metal songs that pour her soul out into a vocal hurricane. Mainly rage, but she expresses other emotions through the thrashing, throat-rending chords. The show explores the tension within Retsuko being trapped in her public-facing life, centered around her work as a salaryman, and her private desires to be something more than that, or even just her desire to be able to express her inner feelings. Now, this sort of thing, reconciling your true self with your public-facing self, is about as universal a theme in writing as you can find. But it fits in the theme of work life due to the high importance on etiquette that we went through before. The drawback to being a company man, or woman as the case may be, is that your individuality is subsumed into your corporate identity. The Japanese have two similar phrases for this kind of tension, tatamae and honne, and omote and ura. Tatamae literally means facade, and omote means face. Honne means true feelings, while ura just means back. Tatamae and omote are the Retsuko we see at work, one that her friends praise as being exceptionally responsible, that doesn't push back against her superiors, that doesn't shy away from giving 30,000 yen to her friend's wedding, even if it means she has to cut back on food for the month. And then for the Honne and Ura Retsuko, there's death metal. If Headhunted to Another World had dark clouds on the horizon, Agretsuko ranges from partly cloudy to partly sunny. Retsuko's company is populated by some reasonable people, not just her colleagues Feneko and Haida, but also higher-ranking figures like Washimi and Gori. On the other hand, she encounters some outright nasty characters like Director Ton and Tsubone, who engage in power harassment over her. The term is cited directly by Retsuko's co-workers, and was a hot subject in Japan at the time Agretsuko was being aired. The first law against power harassment was passed in 2019 and came into effect for all employers in 2022, all during Agretsuko's run. Per the law itself, power harassment is defined as A, the behavior is from an actor or actors with power over the target of the behavior in a workplace, not only superiors, but also colleagues or subordinates who wield power through their numbers or through control of essential knowledge/experience. B, the behavior is beyond what is necessary and reasonable for the conduct of the business, and C, the behavior is or would ordinarily be harmful to the working life of the target of the behavior, showing that Japan is making an active effort to cure the excesses of bad bosses like Tsubone and Director Ton. So with Denosuke, you can see a successful but unappreciated salaryman prefer working for a demon lord over his old Japanese bosses. Then you have Retsuko, who is unhappy and sometimes abused, but able to maintain a semblance of work-life balance and find her happiness as the show goes on. But now the storm clouds are upon us. What if you were in a situation where you would rather see the apocalypse instead of having to go back into the office for one more day? This is Akira Tendo, protagonist of Bucket List of the Dead and former employee of an ad agency. He doesn't use the term in the episode, just calling it one of those exploitative companies, but there is a term for this kind of office environment that brings all the worst excesses of salaryman life to bear: black companies. An unfortunate name in the vein of Goku Black, black companies form a rotten underside of Japanese office life. Early in the first episode, he says that he pulled 2 all-nighters on his first 2 days at the job. In another clip, two employees compare how many hours of unpaid overtime they've worked that month. Indeed, the opening scene of Zom Bucket 100 ticks off the checklist items for what a black company can be. Excessive working hours, which are explicitly illegal. High turnover rate. At one point, Akira sees how many of his colleagues' name tags have been thrown in the trash as they left the company. Low salary. One of the colleagues mentions that he makes roughly $2,000 a month, and that's said to be more than Akira makes. No vacation or paid leave. It's said that the company has it, but nobody dares take it. The only part of the checklist I picked from a website about developer jobs in Japan that his ad agency didn't explicitly do was short recruitment time. So black companies are defined not just by bad vibes, but also by flouting Japanese labor laws, including the law on power harassment that I cited before. In 2014, the Shinzo Abe government passed a law designed to tackle the problem of karoshi, or death by overwork. This law limited monthly overtime to 80 hours, which would still mean employees pulling about 20 hours of overtime a week on average. Though black companies engage in illegal activities like breaking overtime laws or not observing other hostile workplace laws, there's still enough of them that until 2021, there was a website handing out Japan Black Company Awards, celebrating the inglorious winners with a copy of Japanese labor law. The next layer of Japanese work life is the arubaito, broadly termed as part-time work. The last anime showed a normal man dragged into a hellish job. Well, then our first arubaito example reverses that, bringing literal Satan to McDonald's. Hataraku Mao-sama, loosely localized as the devil is a part-timer, is a reverse isekai show that, while I was researching for this panel, actually spends a lot less time in the workplace than I remembered or than the title suggests, but it still has a lot to teach. It follows a character named Demon Lord Satan, Mao Satan in Japanese, who flees through a portal to Japan rather than face defeat by the human hero. Once there, he finds his magic is sapped, and while his loyal servant does research on where to find magic in our world, he assumes the name Mao Sadao and pays the bills by working at McRonald's, part of a proud tradition of anime ripoffs of McDonald's. He soon learns that the human hero had followed him through the portal and was stuck in the same situation, but she's working at a call center for Dokodemo, a play on the Japanese cell phone giant NTT Docomo. The Japanese refer to part-time work as arubaito, which is the odd Western loan word in Japanese that doesn't come from English, instead coming from the German word for work, Arbeit. Translating arubaito as part-time job is a bit misleading because the Japanese government includes them as part of a broad category of non-regular workers, many of whom work full-time just without a fixed-term contract. In the 1980s, the government used two terms to describe this group. Pat, from English part, for housewives with part-time jobs, and then arubaito for students. But the reality, as in Devil is a Part-Timer, is that the group covered by these two definitions has always been larger than housewives and students. Also per the government, about 37% of workers in 2021 were some sort of non-regular worker, and 71% of those were part-timers, compared to about 27% of the workforce who fit roughly in the salaryman definition. Now, Mao is not a teenager, though what fake age he claims to be is not stated, and not a student, but he nevertheless works alongside one, the high schooler Chiho, who looks up to him and initially had the hots for him. You don't get many details about Mao's other McRonald's co-workers, but you see a mix of age and genders that fits with the diversity of the arubaito cohort. His store manager is a woman who seems vaguely 20 or 30-something and is a full-timer. Just like in the US, part-time work has the advantages of greater flexibility for people with other obligations, like second-income parents, school students, or demons looking to regain magic powers. For a demon who had to hypnotize local bureaucrats into giving him an ID at all and has no work history to speak of, it's also an easy way to get your foot in the door. This also fits for the hero's call center job. It also has the same drawbacks of low wages, even greater gender inequality than in salaryman work, and being easier to lay off or fire than regular workers. Mao does take advantage of some good opportunities, though. His is one of the sunnier workplaces we've seen so far. His boss is supportive, and the overall vibe of the working environment is usually shown as pretty dignified. By midway through the first season, Mao is promoted to shift manager, and even before that is heard to be getting modest hourly raises, suggesting an environment where more pride is taken in your work than in American media portrayals of fast food jobs, as seen in the clip playing now. Here you see that pride on display, with a bit of Mao's Demon Lord melodrama shining through, but you definitely have a sense from his dedication and from his co-workers' response that this is more than mere shift work. Now, when writing this panel, I wanted to put the different series in neat little categories, but that was thwarted by the fact that arubaito and small business really have a lot of overlap, especially in shows focused on them. So now I'm just going to jump back and forth between them, starting with the first small business anime on the list, Denkigai. Fitting to start a small business anime about an anime at an Akihabara dojin shop, though for whatever reason they never use that name to describe their locale. The first episode uses obvious aliases for Kamaket and Tokyo Big Sight, however, so that tracks. The shop is named Uma no Hone, meaning horse bone, and is itself an alias for the real Akihabara dojin shop Tora no Ana, meaning tiger's lair. This one, too, is a comedy slice of life and doesn't go over many of the business aspects of where they are, but can still yield some actionable information. Like the rest of the list, it also overlaps with arubaito because a number of the employees treat it as a side gig. As an aside, everyone in the show is known by their nicknames except for the straight man main character, which I say to highlight two of the part-timers, Fu Girl, the high school student, and Sensei, the up-and-coming dojin artist. Bookstores have a special place in Japanese culture in a country where reading physical media has remained stubbornly more popular than in others. But Japanese bookstores are not immune to the same problems facing the rest of the world. The number of bookstores in Japan dropped in half from 2003 to 2023, and many of those casualties fall on small businesses who are less able to leverage connections with publishers. In 2024, the Japanese government launched an initiative to try and help small booksellers, with one particular advantage of booksellers being the in-person experience, which is highlighted in the first episode of Denkigai, where the character nicknamed Sommelier holds a session where he is able to recommend the right manga for the right person simply by observing them. The employees are shown working odd hours to accommodate the occasional special event, like a Christmas Eve launch of a dating sim game or a midnight launch of a choice dojin to create more engagement for the business. Aside from the flexibility offered for the more informal employment at Uma no Hone, you also see people working with what they really love, mostly. The blonde girl Hyo-tan is not an otaku of some sort like the others. This is a positive change versus the kind of jobs I looked at earlier, either the spectrum of salaryman jobs or being a frontline McDonald's grunt. Denkigai doesn't shy away from some of the downsides of this sort of work, like being asked to put on a Mrs. Claus outfit to hawk a dating sim outside in the winter, or the mundanity of having to add plastic wrap to thousands of copies of a book, but it does present the overall vibe as something aspirational. Next in our small business arubaito blend is Blend S. Blend S is a slice-of-life workplace comedy starring Maika Sakura no Miya, a high school girl who wants to save money for a future study abroad trip, but she has one problem. People find her natural gaze intimidating and scary no matter what she does to try to look friendly. Then one day she runs into a role-play maid cafe who just so happens to be looking for someone to play a sadist, and she's a natural fit. Now that isn't really a job hunting experience that a lot of people can relate to, but there are still components worth looking at relating to working in Japan. Two threads I want to pull on specifically, the first being Maika's boss Dino, an Italian immigrant. Immigrants making small businesses, especially small restaurants, is passé to us Americans, but the fact that they are fairly common in major Japanese cities is surprising when you compare that to Japan's also passé low immigration rates. Per the Japan Times, immigrants only make up 3% of the Japanese population, but that still amounts to millions of people overall. A 2017 academic paper from Border Crossing UK on immigrant workers in Japan found that food service was the one sector where immigrants were most likely to be accepted by Japanese natives, and that there was more skepticism about their ability to serve properly in other parts of the service economy. The paper also cites that immigrant entrepreneurs are able to fill the same niches in Japan that they are elsewhere in the world. Authentic foods from their home country and importing items for other immigrants originating from the same community. The paper also cites that these immigrant entrepreneurs quickly have to diversify due to the presence of copycats. And I can say from my own travel that there are a lot of Italian places in Japan, hence Dino's unique approach around roleplay-themed maid cafe. The second thread I'm going to tug on looks at a uniquely Japanese employment opportunity, the maid cafe. The maid cafe originated based on sex appeal from a restaurant chain called Anna Miller's in the 1980s, but then made the jump into otaku culture with the 18-plus computer dating sim Welcome to Pia Carrot, which was a game based on the Anna Miller's experience with an anime-style twist. The creators of this game made a cosplay cafe based on the characters, and the rest is history. Staff at maid cafes are expected to do the kind of mundane tasks that all food service staff do, such as preparing the workplace if you're on opening shift, or cleaning if you're on closing, as well as taking and filling orders. The core of the experience comes from the performances put on by the waitstaff, the elaborate greetings and farewells to customers. The extra sources of revenue for both the maids and the cafe itself come from items like photo sessions or signature drinks and food items. The performers usually make about 10 to 30% commission on these extras bought by the guests. The website I cited for this says maids can make about 1,200 to 2,000 yen an hour on average, and that popular cast members can make up to 200,000 yen a month on raking in those extras. In Maika's case as a minor, she would be prevented from working past 10 p.m., and the cafe is unable to serve alcohol if it wants to hire under 18s. Maid cafes in particular, unlike their spicier counterparts in the hostess club side of things, also have strict rules against getting too personal with the cast members to help create a safe work environment. Speaking of a safe work environment, have you ever been held up by one of your customers to try and scare you into helping a gangster solve a kidnapping? Well, this walrus has. Odd Taxi is an anime about a taxi driver who's a little odd, also because his name is Oguma. He's a cabbie who gets deeply embroiled in the personal affairs of several of his fares, along with friends and associates, along with Odokawa's situationship with the nurse who works for his primary care doctor. There isn't much more I can say about this one, except please watch it. If you watch just one of the anime I discussed today, it should be this one. It is, ironic to the cartoon animal cast, a deeply human story, and full of a lot of dry humor that scratches a different itch than a lot of the more otaku-oriented fare on offer here. The first thing you'll notice about Odokawa's taxi in the sub is that it says privately owned taxi on the side of his white car. Cabbies in Japan may or may not work for a taxi cab company, separate from the concept of ride-sharing, which has had its own kind of gnarly path to acceptance in Japan. Working freelance has the benefit of only needing to adhere to the laws and not to your company's specific expectations, like a uniform or how you must behave with customers. One of these laws is that you're required to take anyone who hails you with few exceptions, which partly explains the situation our hero found himself in before. In Tokyo specifically, fares are regulated by the city government, which actually raised the fare rate in January of 2026 to deal with a labor shortage. At the same time, though, taxis in Japan are notoriously expensive compared to many foreign countries, with a 2019 survey saying Japan had the second highest fare rates in the world after Switzerland, with a 3-mile ride costing about 1,900 yen. Cabbies in Japan still aren't making great money by Japanese standards, but they don't fall too far below the average wage in Tokyo. Now, the clip I showed is an extreme example of a bad fare, but a news article I read about a white-glove cab company pointed out every cabbie's worst nightmare: someone throwing up in the back seat. Because of the laws requiring most fares to be picked up, the cabbie can't turn someone away even if they seem visibly drunk. And the prime time for cabbies is when the barflies who failed to make the last train, which is typically around 11 p.m. to midnight, file out of the bars, so it's something they unfortunately get used to. Those witching hour rides are a main draw to cabs in cities like Tokyo, where public transit is extensive, cheap, and reliable. And true to that niche, Otokawa is usually seen working at night. Otokawa is a fellow who likes to carry on a good conversation, even if he's not as friendly as one would expect a service worker to be. This is where cabbies cut against the stereotype about Japanese workers who are overly formal and would seem unwilling to engage in small talk, though cabbies working for companies have guidelines for what they should discuss. Indeed, frustration with chatty cabbies led one company in Kyoto to try a silence taxi service in 2017. But again, being his own man means Otokawa is able to set his own rules, including the very Seinfeldian conversations he likes to have. Really, you could do a whole panel on Odd Taxi as a cross-section of urban Japanese work and life. The situationship I mentioned with the nurse earlier gives a good look into working at a small doctor's office. Otokawa and his friend frequent an izakaya run by a middle-aged woman. You even get a look into a low-level idol and talent management group, though that one gets up to shady practices with what they force the talent to do on the side. Likewise, he has frequent run-ins with the police, and they're seen doing their more mundane daily work along the way. Odd Taxi is a great story of a lone wolf cabbie, nevertheless deeply embedded in his community. Looking at another independent business man, we're going off to another world again, this time to the isekai of By the Grace of the Gods. This story stars Ryoma Takebayashi, a 39-year-old salaryman at a black company who goes to sleep one night and wakes up talking to three gods who inform him that he died in an embarrassing way in his sleep, sneezing until he rolled out of bed and hit his head. He gets reincarnated as an 8-year-old human boy in a world of monsters and magic, and the gods grant him high stats and various magical skills. For the first 3 years of his life, he lives on his own in the woods, fending for himself and doing what any magical boy would do, taming an army of slimes to do his bidding. He learns a lot about slime breeding and figures out that certain breeds are incredibly useful for different household tasks. Some slimes eat waste, some make a sticky resin, some can detoxify, and some have a peculiar hunger for the dirt on clothes and dishes. He gets brought into civilization by a nobleman's family, and once there, sets out to earn his keep, eventually leading to someone from the Merchants Guild realizing that his cleaner slimes would be perfect for starting a laundry business, and so he does just that. It's a laundry isekai. This series doesn't lean as much on his old world skills like Headhunted to Another World does. In fact, his child's body has affected his mind somewhat, so he's regressed in some of the social skills he had on Earth, namely no more poker face when negotiating. But he does retain the soft skills of a middle manager and systems analyst to set up a workflow for his slimes and his human hires to do the job right. Starting a small business in Japan is not that much different from how it's portrayed in the show. In the show, he just has to run it past the head of the local merchants guild, and once he gets her go-ahead, he even gets help in the form of staffing assistance, though he has to buy the lot for his business and do construction on it himself. In reality, you do have to have a business address first, and it can't be a temporary office, virtual office, or your own home, with some rare exceptions. That latter is kind of funny because the stereotype for the small business in Japan is that it is run out of your home, sort of. Think Bob's Burgers, where they're in the same building, but the family home is an apartment above the business, which is also the case with Dino and Blend S. You do have to incorporate the business, which I'd say is equivalent to Ryoma's need to consult with the merchant guild mistress. You can register a business as a joint stock corporation, an LLC, a general partnership, or a limited partnership. Once you have a place to do business and a registration, it's off to the races. The show plays with some of the tropes that I've discussed so far. Ryoma came from a black company, but unlike in Zombucket 100, he seems to refer to it almost as a point of pride. He knew it was an abusive environment, but was proud of the fact that it didn't break him. At the same time, though, is very conscientious about not repeating the same abuse as a manager here. The two staffers he gets via the guild end up working all day non-stop their first day because the business was more popular than imagined, and he recalls his old business, apologizes, and immediately sets out on getting new hires. He also inverts the trope of living above your business. He lives off-site with that nobleman's family I mentioned, but provides on-site dorm rooms for his staff, which quickly grows along with the volume of business. Last of all, we're going to talk about working. I want to go all Abbott and Costello on this, so I mean the 2011 anime called Working, or also known as Wagnaria, based on the name of the restaurant chain where the anime takes place. The show co-stars Sota Takanashi and Poplar Taneshima, the latter's name being a joke that her parents wanted her to grow big and tall like a poplar tree, and she's 17, and people keep mistaking her for a 12-year-old. Her short stature is the inciting incident for the show because the restaurant she works at needs more help, and Sota is drawn to her because he likes little kids. Nope, not that way. He likes small and cute things in general, and so takes her up on the offer of a part-time job. They work for Wagnaria, a family-style restaurant in the manner of Denny's, which is itself a popular restaurant chain in Japan. The show takes the form of a restaurant workplace comedy with a variety of workers with bizarre character traits, along with the two straight-man chefs who seem to be the ones who actually keep the restaurant running. This is something the show shares with Blend S, where it's also Dino's put-upon chef that keeps the cafe in working order, by the by. This is because the manager doesn't do much except eat and deal with the occasional troublemaking diner. An early episode shows her to be woefully inept at actual restaurant work, which she suggests is a good incentive for her employees to do their jobs because she can't do them at all. This puts working more in the category of agretsuko, of a workplace that isn't a hell, but is one where the employees are less gung-ho and more burnouts. The waitstaff at Wagnaria are all high school students, too, with only the managers and chefs being legal adults, so you can see the kind of experience that high school students gain in a part-time job. Practical skills like learning to work with a variety of coworkers and learning how to handle customers. A 2022 survey says that about 20% of Japanese high school students work in arubaito at some point, and both girls and boys listed restaurant work as one of their top choices for a part-time job, where they hope to learn the value of money and to understand business manners and language. Now that you've reviewed this deck, HR needs you to like, subscribe, and leave a comment acknowledging your understanding of this material. Capiche?